The sun rose far overhead as afternoon tints the sandy ground with bright pink and orange. Lucien is excitedly peering at the scenery as Key points out the finer details. Camellia and Michaela are lingering behind, quietly looking ahead and observing as they talk. Camellia looks slightly irritated, her brows furrowed and face pulled in a grimace. Michaela has a blank look on her face. Camellia, are you... I don't want to talk about it right now. Look, I understand why you would be upset, but... Mika, there's no but here. Michaela frowns, looking down with soberness, causing Camellia to flinch when she realized she'd been hurtful. I'm not as upset as I seem. It's just going to take a bit for me not to be prickly. With this, the maid nods, waiting for her friend to continue. I just wish you would consider my wishes before doing things like... She trails off, briefly distracted by Lucien and Key's chatter.
So the natural flora around here is all based around the sea? Yep! You see, Prospera is the next town over, and according to Tobias, that town has a ton of hand-grown sea champions. They've also got woundwort. Woundwort? That's such an odd name for a plant. Isn't it? They're pretty yellow and...
Camellia looks on wistfully. As she does so, Michaela takes notice of this, then looks at Lucien, who is smiling the first genuine smile in a while.
You know, you and your mother were the ones that got him so inquisitive.
I don't want to take credit for that. I know what you're doing, Camellia. You're just making yourself feel worse. Look, I don't want to talk about it. Can you just do me a favor and leave it alone? Please? With that, Michaela lets out another sigh, then nods. Camellia exhales through her nose, then continues to walk forward, forcing herself to smile again. Lucien looks up to see her, then grins sheepishly.
Oh, hey, we were just starting to talk about the birds.
Funny how we barely seen any.
Most of them are in Central Calphos, near Tobias.
Though it's strange.
Usually there are at least some gulls out.
He looks up at the sky, eyebrows arching slightly.
And it doesn't seem like there's a sea storm coming. Maybe they're just nesting? It is spring. Yes, but we'd at least be hearing them.
Michaela watches on, then pauses. She looks further ahead, her eyes narrowing. They then immediately widen, mouth parting as she runs over, knocking over Lucien to their front. He lets out a yelp, but further shrinks back as a stone wall shoots up from where he was. More and more stone walls surround them in what seems to be a pathway. A maze? Camellia looks at the two, then quickly helps them up. She glances at Michaela, who looks around, her eyes wide but still composed despite the situation. The young noble then glances back at Key, who is looking up at the walls surrounding them with perplexion. I'm presuming this also isn't normal? Key shakes his head slowly, turning around in his face.
This has never happened before. No.
Michaela begins to dust off Lucien, who squirms slightly as a big smile comes across his face.
Do you think this is some sort of trial?
I don't think so.
But every good story has a thing the main characters have to overcome, no?
Camellia crosses her arms, grunting sternly. We were overcoming enough before we got here. Key? She glances over at Key, who still is turning around, looking anxious and confused. His expression showed pure flabbergast. The wooden boy walks up to the stone wall, tracing each edge slowly, beginning to squint. Key? The wooden boy jumps with a yelp, then looks over at her.
Yeah?
Is there any way you could spawn some sort of marker for places we've been?
Making a rope would be too much this time, but...
He looks to the air, thinking to himself. He then lifts a finger, excitedly jumping up.
Ooh! Chalk!
With that, the door pops open, and a piece of chalk rolls out. The wooden boy then grabs it with a grin. Across from him, Camellia shivers. I'm never going to get used to that. He walked up to the stone wall, making an X on the side.
This will indicate where we started. That's a good idea.
He excitedly hops up, giving the young man a high five. Although Camellia just lets out an exasperated sigh. She then looks over at Michaela, who stares off far into the distance. Her lips are pursed, eyes blank. The green-haired noble squints, opening her mouth. But before she can question the maid, Michaela turns back to the group. I'll lead us. My luck's always been better anyhow. At this, Camellia cocks an eyebrow, but she shrugs. Then lead the way, smart girl. Michaela then turns, her blonde braid whipping down her back. The younger Perenne jumps up with enthusiasm, scrambling to walk beside her. He bounds up as well, a nervous smile on his face. The only one who lingered behind was Camellia. There was a buzz in her chest, a flutter of unease as she looked at the walls. Then she slowly trailed behind her free group mates, looking around. The stone walls are cracked, though they had an odd mixture of that, clay, and bits of pumice. She squints, unsure of what to think. She turns back to the group, looking at Michaela as her braid swayed back and forth. The way she moved was confident, but precise. The maid quickly made a corner turn, the two boys jumping up, startled. I wish I were as confident as you. Come on, Cam. You know that I'm not actually. Camellia lingers behind her back, still furrowing her brows.
I think she meant in your decisions, Michaela.
The noble then smacks her hand to her face, nodding slowly at the wooden boy's observation. Oh, I guess I've just... She quickly makes another turn as Key marks another line. I've just always been very good at mazes. Maybe it's the glasses, making my eyesight better.
Wow! Did the outside invent spectacles that give you the ability to see through walls?
Stars, I wish. Camellia finally catches up, crossing her arms. Nika, you're terrible with directions. Yes, but I've been practicing. I didn't want you to be the one guiding me through town constantly. She turns again, her braid whipping around from her speed. Camellia struggles to keep up, and the two boys linger behind, exchanging a glance of discomfort as they hear the sharpness in their tone. What's really going on? You've been acting strange, Miakalumba. I know you're upset with me coming, but this isn't the time. This isn't about that. Okay, this is about that just a little bit, but I promise I'm not angry anymore. I'm just concerned. There isn't anything to be concerned about. I'm fine. Fine? You're never this secretive. With that, Michaela whips around, clenching her fists. She opens her mouth, but quickly stops. What? I said you're never this— No, look! She points backwards, and Camellia turns, seeing a dead end where there was a path earlier. Key and Lucien nowhere in sight. Her eyes widen with panic. What? She runs up to the wall, slamming her fists against it desperately.
Let me through! Lucien! Key!
Stop! You're going to hurt yourself.
What if he gets hurt? What if I lose him? It's always when I'm not watching him that something happens.
Breaking your hands won't help him. In a moment, she grabs Camelia's hands gently, holding them close. Camelia's blood stains her fists. The maid then lets out a sigh, reaching into a pocket on her skirt and pulling out a bandage and some salve. She begins to apply it. Besides, he can take care of himself, okay? This won't be like before.
I know.
She looks down at her fists, watching as Michaela patches them up. Her knuckles are the worst off, split open as blood trickles down her fingertips.
When we almost lost him, I couldn't bear it. Then immediately afterwards,
As she says this, her gaze slowly drifts up to Michaela, who continues looking at Camelia's fists, patching them up as much as she can. I remember. You don't have to remind me.
I'm sorry for being so overprotective.
When you're less stressed, we can talk more about it. Moreover, when that happens, I want you to use your ability on that. I doubt our resident painter likes having scraped up hands. At this, Camellia blushes, looking down as she begins to smile.
I don't paint anymore. But thanks.
Michaela lets out another laugh, then turns back towards the pathway. I have a feeling we'll run into our two boys soon. He is probably leading Lucien through it. He's a smart kid. Camellia nods, allowing Michaela to lead her through. As she walks, she winces, feeling her fists sting. She then lets out a sigh and forces herself to continue on the path. She was led slowly through, Michaela barely even thinking as she turned each corner.
Do you really trust Key?
Of course I do. He's harmless. Camellia grimaces, then inhales, continuing to look forward. Come on. We know by now if he was dangerous.
I just don't know. You know that it's odd, right? Lucien claims he found him on the beach, except I wasn't there with him. And he only ever really went there with...
You can't just write this whole situation off because of your father. It might be different from what you expect. Camellia grunts in acknowledgement. She scratches her arm, wincing as her fingers crack with pain.
I'm trying not to hold it against him. It's just all so odd to me. It doesn't add up.
Michaela simply shrugs, continuing on the road with sharp steps forward. Camellia lags behind her, looking at the vines creeping up the walls surrounding them. They were covered in cut thorns, almost as if the vines were pruned rose stems. But then, the noble smacks into her friend, who had stopped with furrowed brows. Camellia looks around her shoulder, then pauses, seeing an obsidian gate built into the maze, leading into a clearing. In the center was a marble sculpture, depicting a man with long hair in a kneeling position, his hands gathered together, almost as if he were holding something. The clearing was completely quiet, save for the sound of tweeting on the statue. The girls slowly crept closer, seeing a small bird in the statue's hands. It was pecking at it, intermittently pruning itself. As the two women got closer, the wren looked up, letting out another tweet before flying off. This left the two of them in silence again. The statue's expression was somber, almost lonely, but he still looked grateful regardless. His face wasn't visible, obscured by his massive hair. Camellia looks up at it with confusion, then looks over at her friend, who is looking past the statue at a gate out of the clearing.
I think that may be the exit.
Camellia looks back at the maze, making a face of worry.
They're not out yet.
Camellia...
Wait!
Camellia walks back into the maze as Michaela tries to stop her. She rushes inside, blindly going through, then she stops, hearing struggling deep within.
Lucien!
She runs in further, but immediately halts as she sees Key grabbing at Lucien's arm.
Get away from him!
Key looks back at her, his eyes widening. She rushes over, then stops midway, seeing that Lucien was struggling to get up with an injured leg.
He tried climbing the wall to see above it, but...
Camellia bit the side of her cheek, realizing that she had been wrong to jump to anger. She walks over, kneeling while Lucien holds his leg. There was a blackening bruise on his pale skin, beginning to flower further, and his ankle was bent in a concerning direction.
Lucien... I'm okay.
No, you're not. Her gaze softens, and she begins to breathe in slowly, before putting a hand on his leg. The wooden boy furrows his brows, watching on with confusion. Camelia's eyes glow bright gold before she closes them, a drip of sweat pooling on her forehead as her hands glow with ethereal light. The bruise begins to go away, and Lucien yelps as his ankle snaps back into place. Key's segmented mouth unhinges as he looks on, awestruck.
Wow! Is that a thing you can both do?
Lucien looks away, rubbing his leg with a grimace. His sister simply lets out an embarrassed sigh. No. Just me. Key makes a noise of excitement, but then looks down at her knuckles as they spurt out blood onto the bandages, tilting his head.
Were you injured too? Maybe you could use your abilities on it.
She gets tired after doing it once.
The wooden boy glances between the two. Camellia is shifting slightly with discomfort.
But what about...
It's okay. He needed it more than me. He frowns, then nods, helping Lucien up. Lucien still wobbles slightly on his reset foot. The older sister is about to comfort him, but he walks past her quietly, ears drooping. She watches after him, eyes narrowing before she looks at her split knuckles. Why can't I do anything right? He is lagging behind Lucien, but he looks back at her with worried eyes, then starts to linger between the two, as if suspended in space. He turns back to Camellia, wearing a serene smile. It's okay. Her head shoots up with surprise, her eyes widening. Sees he's already continuing to trail behind Lucien. Camellia stands there, wondering if she'd imagined his words. Settling on staying confused, she follows the two boys. They make it to the clearing where Michaela is standing with worry. She looks around, then waves them over, a smile on her face. While both Key and Lucien are relieved, Camellia simply looks at her, a frown coming to her face. Why didn't she come after her? What happened? Why was she acting so weird? The green-haired noble shakes her head, following the three out, refusing to speak more as the sun began to set overhead.